Hello guys, and welcome back to another episode of KSP Resurgence. This episode we're going to be wrapping up our entire Hades system grand tour, returning home, and doing a few other extra things. So last episode we wrapped up by landing on Chrome, a rather icy moon of the Kalis ice giant system. Now it's time to actually rendezvous with the Excalibur interstellar vehicle. Now, you may notice we're actually a little bit low on fuel right now, so unfortunately, the crew of this lander are going to be somewhat stranded. Now, thankfully, the Excalibur has plenty of fuel. In fact, they actually just refuel by scooping a bunch of exospheric hydrogen from Kalis' atmosphere. So, it has a full tank, so it's more than capable of pulling the weight that this lander couldn't carry. Now, this lander isn't out of commission because the Excalibur actually does have some lithium fuel on board, so I could use this lander again if I wanted to, but this mission's over, so there's really no reason to carry this lander around anymore. But I will be doing some of the inclination change with this lander specifically, just because I do have just enough fuel. Now, with the last bit of fuel, I am able to circularize. Somewhat of a harsh word to say. But unfortunately, this lander is basically a floating asteroid with Kerbals on board. Which is basically a really weird way of saying a space station. Now at this point, all that's left for there to do is to actually get Excalibur to dock with the lander. Usually it'd be the lander docking with Excalibur, but the lander, I believe, ran out of monopropellant, which in this save file it's replaced with hydrazine. So it's going to be a much more difficult rendezvous in docking. Now I do have some RCS jets on this that are actually powered by hydrogen, so it's more than capable of actually performing some docking maneuvers, albeit very slowly and not at the most optimal frames per second. Because Excalibur, it has a lot of parks, it lags my entire PC out. I mean, most of that part count's probably coming from the weird triangular radiators. I regret not using the ones from Sterling Systems, because those would have gotten the job done with way less parts. Turning the Excalibur around is a real pain because the reaction wheels are actually very weak when it comes to very large vessels. I mean, I could just use tweak scale, but I really wish there was a mod that would add like heavy duty very large-scale reaction wheels for very big spacecraft. Now, we did whiz right by the Kerbals and maybe giving them a fair bit of radiation poisoning, but we still managed to have a really optimal rendezvous. Now, the radiation they're getting from the beam core antimatter engine might not actually be that bad since it's not pointing directly at them. And if the push design ISVs can actually carry crew without giving them a lethal amount of radiation poisoning, I mean, this is perfectly safe. I mean, the whole thing with like having a push ISV interstellar vehicle so that instead of actually like having the engine push against the structure and creating a lot of stress, it actually pulls it, and the tensile strength holds it together. The whole reason why the engines don't obliterate everything is because they're pointing just a few degrees away from everything. And since this engine's pointing a few degrees away from the lander, I can logically assume that the crew on it is safe and not getting obliterated by pure annihilation. Now, since the lander is basically all out of monopropellant, I do have to do all the docking basically by using only Excalibur's RCS. However, the lander is actually powered by some power cells, so it does have reaction wheels. If I couldn't use a Matt Long lazy method of docking here, that would have been a real struggle. Thankfully, the docking goes really well, and then I can transfer all the lithium into the lander, giving it a full tank once again. Now at this point, the entirety of the Grand Tour is actually over. Well, I keep saying it's over. I said it was over last episode, even though we still have the entire return journey ahead of us. Usually it would have taken like 2 years to get back to the Kerbal Space Center, but actually it's only going to take 1 year. Since I did do a whole lot of refueling, it's going to allow me to take a much more aggressive return trajectory, burning a whole lot more fuel than I would have done so previously. And still, it gives the Kerbals a whole lot of time to process through all the science in the 2 science labs that I placed on this interstellar vehicle. Now, returning back home is actually a somewhat easy task. All you gotta do is point towards your target, of course set towards the star you want to return to, and then just burn that direction for a prolonged period of time. Now, you probably will be off by a small amount, so mid-course correction burn is practically mandatory when it comes to interstellar transfers. In fact, I really wish there's actually a dedicated tool for these interstellar transfers, because the stock maneuver tool just is not built for these kinds of things. I mean, sure, you can try doing it, but expect to either arrive there in 3 billion years or have to hold the prograde marker for 3 billion years. Now, most of the actual coasting I will cut out because it is riddled with a bunch of visual glitches that I have no idea what's causing them. I think maybe having wormholes will solve this issue, but in this series I decided not to have any wormholes just because I feel like that will make the game too easy. In future series though, especially my upcoming KSS2 Promised Worlds one that'll probably come out in eventually soon, trademark, I will add wormholes just because the stock system has already been explored in many other videos. So I don't want to be covering too much of it. I just want to be able to skip straight to the cool interstellar stuff. Now, the worst part about doing an interstellar transfer is actually finalizing your orbit to be a really excellent equatorial one that's in line with your target. Now, with other star systems, the inclinations can be a little bit weird, so doing that might be a little harder. For this case, it's basically all equatorial 0-degree orbits of all the planets. But it's still a little hard just because we're coming in at a rather weird angle. Now, I did a really extremely aggressive burn here. We're running on fumes at this point. Thankfully, the Excalibur can easily refuel just by going to a Glarka, which is basically the orbital fuel depot of the Harmonia system, just because it has a whole lot of hydrogen lurking in its exosphere. Unfortunately, we did enter a very, very inclined Harmonia orbit. In fact, it was almost a retrograde orbit, because the ascending yoke to Sanctor is over 90 degrees. I did have to do a very expensive maneuver to correct this, but thankfully I do have a lot of fuel lying around, despite being on like a very tiny fraction of hydrogen remaining. Thankfully, this beam core antimatter engine is very, very efficient. It can definitely pull its weight in terms of small interplanetary corrections. In terms of refueling and reusing Excalibur, I'm not actually sure if I'm going to do that. I mean, after this, I will be using warp drives, which will basically make all this beam core antimatter stuff completely obsolete, so I'm really not sure if Excalibur is going to be going on any more missions. I may be using it as a, say, maybe an interstellar or colony transport. Maybe I'll just leave it in orbit around Sanctor or some other place, like with Tenacity and Fortitude, which have been orbiting Creek for a few years now, since they've been there since Excalibur was constructed, and Excalibur has been around for 10 in-game years, considering interstellar missions do take a long time, especially without warp drives of any kind. I really cannot wait to unlock warp drives and start using them. The other thing I must mention is that this will be the last episode until the Project Nebulon finale comes out. And since it is a cinematic, it will take a little bit longer to actually create compared to other videos. I haven't really actually used KSP camera tools before, so it is somewhat of a learning curve, but so far it's been going along pretty well. I'm hoping to get it out by the end of this month, but things may change. Who knows, maybe it'll even come out sooner. But in the meantime, I do have plenty of KSP Wayfinders content lying in my hard drive, so I will be uploading those videos in the meantime until Project Nebulon finally releases and brings KSP Resurgence to its well thought through end. After that, this save file definitely will not be over. Cosmic Serenity, which is one of my main planet mods I'm using, will actually be getting an update, hopefully sometime around May. So when that update comes out, I'm definitely going to be making more videos on it. In fact, I'm going to be making a whole new series dedicated to the future of Cosmic Serenity and Celestial Harmony, because those plant packs are still in development. They're still being updated. I'll keep Wayfinders around also until I inevitably explore the entirety of the Zero system from Galileo's planet pack. And after that, I'll probably start my KSS2 Promised Worlds series, which will probably be crazy in terms of how many mods there will be. I mean, I have a whole lot of ideas for our future YouTube series, but I want to I have some unfinished business with a bunch of other YouTube series, and I want to get them finished first. And I did do more of a direct transfer to Sanctar, just because I didn't want to fiddle with the maneuver tool, and I wanted to make sure the Kerbals got home as quick as possible, because they've been floating in space for ages. I mean, Excalibur is probably the most luxurious vehicle I've ever constructed. But, I mean, it gets to a point where you're just tired of sitting in the same place for years on end. Kind of getting the hang of these interstellar missions now. I mean, I've only been on 2 actual interstellar missions, which involve pointing a spacecraft towards a star and then burning for it. Because all the other interstellar travels I've done in the past were used via wormholes. I mean, I've done a whole lot of these I've only done 2 grand tours, but they're really huge missions considering I'm exploring entire star systems at a time. I mean, in future series when I go interstellar, I will be utilizing wormholes. Just because I really want to be able to explore some interstellar destinations while I'm a little bit lower in the tech tree. So it'll give me an excuse to keep revisiting the star instead of going there in one go and never returning. Speaking of returning, I would eventually love to return to the Hades system at some point in the sequel series to Resurgence to set up a permanent colony. I will not be using Kerbal colonies just because at this point in the game I don't have to worry about mining resources. I just want to use plain old Kerbal constructs just to set up a launch site there so I can have a much easier time doing interstellar travels. Besides, I don't want to have to ferry Kerbals between stars all the time, just because it's going to get very annoying eventually. Besides, eventually when I'm done with Project Nebulon, I'll have access to the entire tech tree, hopefully. Which includes jump gates, so I guess my headcanon says that the Kerbals can just travel between the colonies via jump gates. Now, at this point, I'm just going to take the Helium SSTO for my interstellar excursions and actually just use it to take a small amount of crew home. Now, it can't carry the entire crew, but it does carry some. Besides, I do want to reuse the shuttle eventually. Just because it's probably been my most successful space plane ever. I really do like the mod Impulse Party, which does add the primary engine I'm using. Small artifact, turns out Excalibur was using some of the fuel off of the Helium space shuttle. It's not a space shuttle, it's a space plane. So we don't have much fuel to work with, but thankfully the air-breathing engines can fly indefinitely in an atmosphere. back to what I was saying about Impulse Party, I do love the engines and just being able to use them without worrying too much about TWR and efficiency, but I feel like they are a little bit too overpowered and just use a little bit too much hand-wavium. So they're not really too realistic, but at this point in the game, anything's possible. You're like at the maximum part of the tech tree. For a bit, I thought about flying back to a launch site, but it was super far away and I didn't have any hydrogen to work with, so these engines weren't going to be able to propel the helium that far. So I decided to splash down to the ocean, and unfortunately, I ended up tearing off the wings. Which unfortunately seems to be a somewhat recurring theme with spaceplanes. Now, the next launch is going to be a really unique vehicle, just because it's our first actual warp-capable ship. It's going to be called the Warpscout. It's going to be a little scouting device to try to find graviolum, which basically is a magical resource that allows warp drives to run in this mod pack. It's a very small vessel, but it's capable of warping very fast. I didn't even bother getting to an orbit, because with these warp drives, it can practically go anywhere almost instantly. In fact, you can get to Cryo, which is basically Sanctar's primary moon, almost in an instant. And don't go in the comments saying that I forgot about Alia being a moon. It's not really a moon, it's more of a binary twin of Sanctar. Now, my goal here is to look at every single planetary body in the Harmonious system to see if it has any graviolum deposits. It's graviolium, I think it's graviolium if I recall correctly. Fortunately, graviolium is a very rare substance, especially in celestial harmony, because it turns out that none of the planets are actually configured to have graviolium. The only place that actually had graviolium, I believe, was Rack, which is basically just Dres, but with Proxima's better Dres. Which actually is meant to have graviolium in the stock system with a blue shift installed, just to give Dres a purpose. So I did have to go in the configs and actually add my own custom graviolium deposits. I feel like it's not really cheating just because I'm just copying some reused rational resources configs for, I'm just basically assigning them to the planets. I gave Magnifica and a bunch of other gas giants graviolium deposits just because Joule in the stock system has a significant amount. I just use the same configs that Joule uses, I'm assuming. So when I construct Project Nebulon, the Interstellar ISV Nebulon, which is going to be my very first, well, not my very first, that would be Warpscout, but my first crewed warp ship, it will be constructed on my Creek colony that orbits Magnifica, which is a big pink gas giant, and I'll be using Magnifica's exosphere to harvest graviolium. Now, Rack is the only place that actually has graviolium, but it's very, very small. I actually cheated a craft there just to drill to see how much there actually was, and there is almost no graviolium. To fill up even a substantial amount of fuel just to be able to get a interstellar capable warp ship, it probably take years. That's why we have gas giants, exospheres. The thing about this Warpscout mission is that I get to revisit a whole lot of planets I haven't visited in ages. Like, I haven't visited Trom in ages, which is this really weird, oblate, almost egg-like dwarf planet. I gotta be really careful here to not actually get too close to the planets, just because if you get too close, the warp drives will actually stop working. Like it did right here. I ended up flying too close to the sun and ended up falling straight into Magnifica's atmosphere. So what did I do? I had to load a quick save. After loading the quick save, I was able to resume my lightspeed journey through the entire Harmonious system. Gaia and Poe are probably one of my favorite places in the entire system, just because I like how they look. They're the furthest out planets in the system, unless you count Deception, which I actually haven't visited at all, aside from this single mission. And unfortunately, I'm going so far away that the visual glitches strike again. Now, Deception is a gas giant that's supposed to be a rogue planet, but there's also an option to have it be like kind of like a Planet 9 analog orbiting the Homonia system. The thing is, it doesn't actually have any moons. So it's just a somewhat unpleasant and rather uninteresting place to visit. Hopefully there's eventually an update that'll actually give it a place to visit and therefore a reason to actually go there. Now for the innermost planet of the Harmonia system, Daysar. This is actually really hard for me to warp to, because for some reason I just kept flying right by it. So I have to be very, very careful, especially with the throttle. It's probably because it's so close to the parent star, it's way easier to fly right by it. Fortunately, there isn't really any graviolium here either, so the Warpscout mission was somewhat of a failure. Unless you count the fact that later I actually did add some custom configs to give Magnifica graviolium deposits in Exosphere. So maybe the Warpscout actually wasn't a complete failure. Besides, I guess it's nice to be able to get a hang of the Blue Shift warp drives and actually get acclimated to how they work. Time for a nice little touch and go at Creek, which is the location of my second colony. It's this might be my favorite body in the entire planet pack, just because of its frozen oceans. In fact, if Harmonia decided to go red giant and nuke everything, it might actually be the most habitable place to visit. Now, we still have an interstellar crew just waiting in orbit, so it's time to send the transport home. Now, this is a modified version of the Helium SSTO that's meant to hold way more crew. In fact, I believe it can hold 17 Kerbals, because that big crew cabin from the Mark II expansion actually holds 10 Kerbals when compared to the stock's 4. So one thing I've noticed is that it's a little bit harder for the Helium to actually ascend in Sanctum when it comes to other atmospheric moons with similar properties in terms of gravity and atmospheric density. I think it might be because Sanctum might actually be bigger than them in terms of radius. Or maybe the atmosphere is just like less draggy or something, or more draggy on Sanctar, and just making me a whole lot slower. Now, we do end up losing a whole lot of fuel by swapping out the fuel tank for a crew cabin, but the engine is super efficient, so it definitely is more than capable of doing some interplanetary missions, even with a full tank. I'm not going to be using the Helium for any interplanetary missions, because it's more of a ferry vessel or interstellar excursion vehicle that requires a mothership. I've also noticed I actually have custom waterfall configs for the Impulse Party mod pack. I found them somewhere on Discord because there are a whole lot of small patches of Kerbal Space Program that can actually be found just by going on Kerbal Space Program Discord servers. So I found like a whole bunch of random patches for a bunch of parts mods. Should also probably mention the elephant in the room. That is the black bar of doom and despair that's been plugging all of my videos for the past for the entirety of the Hades Grand Tour. I'm not exactly sure what caused this. I do believe I fixed the issue, because if it wasn't fixed, this will be showing up in KSP wayfinders. But thankfully, it hasn't reared its ugly face yet. I can't really tell because these videos are actually really old. I've recorded this video probably like months ago. But I believe all these videos, this entire video was recorded back in February. Just comes to show how much I love to actually play the game and how much I don't like editing videos. It's more like me actually wanting to stick to my weekly schedule of uploading videos. I have tried bi-weekly videos before, but I didn't think it went so well. Back to the mission at hand, one thing I really don't like about spaceplanes and docking is because for some reason, whenever you control from an inline docking port, the automatic stability assist becomes super unstable and actually starts overcorrecting sometimes, so I do have to use manual control a whole lot. I do believe there are mods like MechJeb that do amend this, and I am using MechJeb in KSP Wayfinders, and I think I will install it in KSP Resurgence for Project Nebulon because it will make autopiloting things easier, considering I am making a cinematic. Now it's time to transfer the entirety of the crew, which it turns out the Helian crew vessel might have been slightly overbuilt. I only filled up a fraction of its crew pods. Doesn't really matter though, we have all the crew, it's time to go home. Now, thankfully this landing won't actually have the same fate as the Helian earlier this episode. I actually will be landing at the Kerbal Space Center. I'm actually really good at landing at the Kerbal Space Center when it comes to space planes. I do have experience in previous Kerbal Space Program save files I didn't record and don't have on YouTube. You know, I remember back in the day, like January of 2024 it was? I think it was 2025 actually, where I played a Kerbal system and I did most of my exploring with an SSTO that I kept using. I always like use it to transfer the crew and actually do all my missions. Now, re-entry was a little bit toasty. The Kerbals did have to do some odd maneuvers just to slow down. Thankfully, it all worked out in the end, and we actually managed to slow down and not explode in the atmosphere. Now, landing at the Kerbal Space Center with volumetric clouds sometimes is a challenge because you actually have to deal with the clouds blocking your view of the runway. Sometimes you actually have to rely on the nav ball to actually guide you. But thankfully, the cloud cover on the Kerbal Space Center is a little bit clear. We have a nice, clear view of the runway. Did have to make a quick save just in case I fumble the landing, but thankfully I was able to get it first try. And with that, the landing is complete. Now, unfortunately, that will be the end of this episode. I hope you guys enjoyed watching it, and I'll see you all later.